You're in a conversation with someone you care about. Nothing dramatic is happening. Nobody is yelling. Nobody is threatening you. Nobody is trying to hurt you. And yet something inside you begins pulling away. You stop sharing. You stop explaining. You start choosing shorter answers. The things you wanted to say remain trapped somewhere between your thoughts and your mouth. To the other person, it may look like disinterest. It may look like stubbornness. It may look like you don't care. But inside, something very different is happening. Inside, you're retreating. The strange thing is that many people don't even realize they're doing it. They don't make a conscious decision to shut down. They don't wake up and think, today I'm going to disconnect from everyone around me. It happens automatically. The conversation becomes uncomfortable. Emotions begin rising to the surface. Vulnerability starts knocking at the door. And before they even realize it, they've begun moving away from the moment. Physically present, emotionally absent. For some people, shutting down feels frustrating. For others, it feels familiar. And familiarity has a strange way of disguising itself as comfort, not because it feels good, but because it feels known. The mind often prefers a familiar discomfort over an unfamiliar risk, even if that familiar discomfort is loneliness, even if it's distance, even if it's disconnection. Most people assume shutting down happens because someone doesn't care enough. But for many people, the opposite is true. Sometimes people shut down because they care too much. They care about being misunderstood. They care about being rejected. They care about saying the wrong thing. They care about being criticized. They care about what might happen if they let another person see what's actually going on inside of them. And when the risk feels high enough, the nervous system begins looking for an exit, not a physical exit, an emotional one. That's an important distinction because many people learned long ago that they couldn't always leave the room. They couldn't always leave the relationship. They couldn't always leave the situation. So they learned something else instead. They learned how to leave emotionally. They learned how to withdraw, how to disconnect, how to disappear while remaining physically present. And what begins as a survival strategy often follows people long after the original situation is gone. Maybe you grew up in an environment where your feelings weren't taken seriously. Maybe expressing yourself led to criticism. Maybe honesty created conflict. Maybe vulnerability was met with dismissal. Maybe you learned that speaking up only made things worse. Or maybe nobody openly taught you these lessons at all. Maybe life taught them quietly through repetition, through enough moments where being seen felt painful and staying silent felt safer. Children are incredible students. They pay attention to what works. If sharing creates pain and silence creates relief, they learn silence. If honesty creates conflict and withdrawal creates safety, they learn withdrawal. If vulnerability feels dangerous and distance feels protective, they learn distance. The problem is that children rarely understand their developing survival strategies. They simply adapt. They do whatever helps them feel safer inside the environment they're living in. And those adaptations often continue operating long after the environment has changed. That's why shutting down can feel so confusing as an adult. Part of you wants connection. Part of you wants understanding. Part of you wants people to know the real you. But another part of you has spent years learning that being fully seen comes with risk. And when those two parts collide, shut down often wins. Not because it's healthy, because it's familiar. That's what makes this topic so difficult to talk about. Many people recognize the cost of shutting down. They recognize the loneliness. They recognize the misunderstandings. They recognize the frustration it creates in their relationships. What they don't always recognize is the benefit their nervous system believes it's receiving. Because shutting down works, at least temporarily. It reduces exposure. It reduces vulnerability. It reduces the possibility of immediate rejection. If you don't say what you feel, nobody can dismiss it. If you don't share your fears, nobody can judge them. If you don't reveal your needs, nobody can ignore them. Silence creates protection. The problem is that protection and connection often move in opposite directions. The same wall that keeps pain out often keeps connection out too. The same shield that protects you from rejection can also protect you from intimacy. The same distance that keeps you safe can keep you lonely. And that's where many people become trapped. Not because they're choosing isolation, because they're choosing safety. The problem is that safety and healing are not always the same thing. Sometimes the behaviors that helped us survive become the behaviors that prevent us from fully living. What once protected us begins limiting us. What once kept us safe begins keeping us small. And because the strategy worked for so long, it becomes difficult to imagine another way. Over time, shutting down can become more than a behavior. It can become an identity. You start telling yourself things like, I'm just private. I'm just independent. I've always been this way. I don't like talking about my feelings. And sometimes those statements contain truth, but sometimes they're disguising something deeper. Sometimes they're protecting an old wound that never fully healed. Because there's a difference between preferring privacy and fearing vulnerability. There's a difference between independence and isolation. There's a difference between choosing silence and hiding inside it. The difficult part is that many people don't discover the difference until they begin looking honestly at their patterns. They begin noticing that the same thing happens over and over again. Every time a conversation becomes emotional, they pull away. Every time conflict appears, they disappear. Every time vulnerability becomes necessary, they shut down. Not because they want to, because their nervous system has learned that's where safety lives. But healing often begins when we start questioning whether the places that once felt safe are still serving us today. Because the truth is that present-day people are not always past-day people. Present-day conversations are not always past-day conversations. Present-day vulnerability is not always past-day vulnerability. Yet many of us continue responding to current situations with old protective strategies. Not because we're weak, because we're human. The goal isn't to force yourself to talk. The goal isn't to become an open book overnight. The goal isn't to shame yourself for shutting down. The goal is understanding. Understanding why silence became home. Understanding why distance feels safer than connection. Understanding why withdrawal feels comforting even when it leaves you feeling alone. Because once you understand the reason, you gain something powerful. Choice. You stop operating entirely on autopilot. You stop assuming that every uncomfortable feeling is a threat. You stop treating vulnerability as proof of danger. And little by little, you begin creating space between what you learned and what you choose. The truth is that healing rarely starts with confidence. It usually starts with awareness, with noticing, with recognizing the pattern while it's happening, with realizing that the urge to disappear is showing up again, and then asking yourself a different question. Not, how do I stop feeling this? But why does this feel necessary? Because sometimes the most important breakthroughs don't happen when we force ourselves to change. Sometimes they happen when we finally understand ourselves clearly enough to choose differently. And maybe that's what this is really about. Not communication, not conflict, not even shutting down. Maybe it's about realizing that the strategies that protected you in the past don't automatically deserve control over your future. Maybe it's about recognizing that the walls you built were never the problem. They served a purpose. They helped you survive. The question is whether they still belong there, because a wall that protects you from pain can also protect you from love. A wall that protects you from rejection can also protect you from connection. And eventually, every person reaches a moment where they must decide whether they're still hiding from danger or hiding from life itself. The goal isn't to destroy every wall. The goal is to stop living behind them. And that journey begins the moment you realize that shutting down doesn't always feel like comfort because it's healthy. Sometimes it feels like comfort because it's familiar. And those are not the same thing.